Welcome to the Steel Flock podcast. We're your co-hosts, Matt and Ryan. And in this episode, we're going from coaching to the players. It's been 1 month since the 2026 free agency period began, and there's been a lot of movement throughout the league, and the AFC North has been no exception. And so today, we're going to cover the spending, departures, arrivals, and re-signings for our four teams.
So I thought we would take a look at kind of where things stand with the AFC North before all the spending happened. There's some things that we might not really have expected here. Ravens are about middle of the pack, right, at 16 in cap space before free agency. Steelers are all the way up at 8th, though, and 6th in draft capital. So really is kind of a wide open field for the Steelers to really improve the team. Bengals up there at 7th also. The Browns are all the way at 30, and I think we all know why. There's one big contract that's kind of hanging over that whole franchise. Yeah, they're all, other than the Browns, the three sort of competitive teams in the North are all in at least in the top half in cap space. So I did think that was really interesting. Yeah, Ryan, do you have any thoughts on that?
It's incredible how I'm sure there are a few, but primarily one contract that's just eating up so much cap space for the Browns. Like I knew that it was huge, but I didn't think it was that big and that consuming of the cap space. Pittsburgh has 12 picks in the 2026 draft this year. And, we've talked a little bit about it on prior episodes, and especially with the draft being in Pittsburgh this year, Omar Khan and Mike McCarthy really need to make a splash. Like, it has to be an exciting draft for the Steelers this year. So, we're all, as in the AFC North teams, we're all in the top half of draft capital. And I think that, especially the Browns, I believe they have 2 picks in the first round. I would have to double check on that, but they can really choose some solid players to kind of add to the foundation with Myles Garrett. And Pittsburgh, they have 1 pick in the first round, 1 pick in the second round, and 2 picks in the third round. So that's a lot of early picks to select some difference makers as well. So the AFC North each team has work to do, and fortunately, at least in terms of draft capital, all of them have some to work with. It's just that cap space for the Browns that kind of puts them in a little bit of a constraint.
Yeah, and that's what's when you mentioned make a splash. The first thing I thought of course, was the first year, youngest GM, the Jags general manager wanted to make a splash, traded next year's pick to move up just a little bit to get Travis Hunter. And, that's not looking so good in hindsight, and it's benefiting the Browns to get them up to that third, spot in draft capital, which we don't like. So you said how many picks they have in this draft, but if they really want to make a splash, which they don't usually do, but there's always next year to borrow from, even though, next year is supposed to be the much stronger draft overall. So we'll see if Omar Khan kind of deviates at all from his tendencies.
Yeah, no, we'll see. Of course, we'll talk about this on later episodes, but in preparation for the draft, for example, Pittsburgh still doesn't have their QB1 figured out, and so next year is supposed to be a strong QB draft. So, Omar Khan might use some of that draft capital from this year for next year. So, there's with 12 picks, there's a lot to work with. So we'll see how it goes. And obviously, though, I hope that we don't give away too much this year in hopes for next year. Hope is not a strategy. And so we as in Omar Khan, they still need to be smart with how that they use their draft picks, either this year or for next year.
Yeah. So I had a couple thoughts, definitely on the Steelers there, but also the Browns, right? So there's 2 teams here that don't have a franchise quarterback, right? And there's one that has, is bottom 3 in cap space, and there's one that is 8th, right? So obviously, with the Steelers, they have you have a lot of cap space because you don't have a QB, and if you have a good one, that's where a lot of your cap space is going, right? That's the gap between the Steelers and the Ravens.
Very true.
Yeah, but I mean, again, if you're not going to have a QB, at least have some cap space, which the Browns sadly do not. But yeah,
Yeah, because how much of that cap too is not only on Myles Garrett, but the other quarterback that's on their roster as well, who
yeah,
may not even be the starter still,
yeah.
right? So let's see how that goes.
But yeah, I mean, from a 1,000-foot view, the Steelers are obviously sort of not going in on a rebuild. But the way they're set up, the way you guys have that amount of cap space and draft capital, if that was a rebuilding team, that's kind of what it would look like, right? With that much 8th in cap space, 6th in draft capital. So,
Yeah,
um,
they have resources to work with, and so I'm as long as they're smart, they have the money to spend and the draft capital to use. So uh, that's why how this draft and the rest of the offseason goes will really kind of, I feel like, set the tone, at least for even for the next few years. So I just gotta hope for the best. I know I said hope is not a strategy, but if the Pittsburgh Steelers were in a rebuild, uh, you make a very good point that they're in a position to make some very impactful changes. The thing with the Steelers, though, is they don't want to be in a rebuild. They absolutely refuse to be in a rebuild. So I don't know how that perspective may or may not affect the choices that they make. If it were a rebuild, they chose to fire sell people, kind of like how the Dolphins have. You would kind of you would see the direction in which they were going, but kind of with and we'll talk about this later in the episode of the players that they've chosen to sign on. Um, it's definitely not a rebuild, and they're in a win now. I've been hearing things online, at least for the last couple years, about how the team is really committed to trying to get Cam Hayward a Super Bowl ring before he retires. And so, that's where the whole all-in approach has come from, at least from what I've seen or heard. And that's definitely something I love about the Steelers is their loyalty to the players and commitment to getting them that ring before they retired, especially for a captain like Hayward, who has been with the Steelers for a very long time. My worry, though, is when you're too committed to the players and too committed to loyalty, I don't know if sometimes that will negatively infect the business decisions, such as whether we want to do a rebuild or whatnot. And the Steelers roster, it's good. Like it's we're definitely not going to come in last place. Are we Super Bowl contenders this year, even with Rodgers coming back with the roster that
mm,
we have and the new coaches? I can't say with certainty yes or no. I'm cautiously optimistic, but I also know that it's my gut is telling me that Pittsburgh is not a Super Bowl contender this year. I mean, even next year is suspect too, because we don't know what's going to happen with the quarterback situation next year, let alone this year. So there's still a lot up in the air for the Steelers, and I know they're really trying to be all win now, trying to get Cam Hayward that Super Bowl ring, but I just don't know how much that player loyalty and commitment has impacted business decisions over the last few seasons, trying to find band-aids or stopgaps at quarterback, you know, continuing to pay the older players that are starting to lose their effectiveness, and that's kind of where I don't know if the business decisions have been necessarily for the future of the franchise versus we got to just do this right now, and then we'll cross that bridge when we get there, which from a business perspective, that's not really good succession planning. And so I worry, at least over the last few seasons, that's kind of where the approach has been.
Yeah, you guys are in a tough spot. Just going through these other stats here, you know, I feel like every draft I look at it, I'm like, wow, the Steelers are really cooking, you know. But looking here at the homegrown talent, you know, they're at, you know, the bottom of the league, 29th in homegrown talent, which is this is an overthecap.com figure for, you know, whether you were original UDFA or draft pick for that team. So, you know, the Steelers for, yeah, I think generally as being a pretty loyal team, you know, spending big money to extend their own players, they're down at 53%. And the Ravens are up at 83% in first place. So, I was a bit surprised to see that. The Bengals, you know, and the Browns, they're not that far from the league average, which is 61%. So, you know, kind of typical there. But yeah, I mean, this is, you know, I think both of our teams are really at a crossroads where there's a lot of pressure right now to win. And so yeah, just quickly running through the cap figures. Yeah, I mean, you can see that, you know, all three. Well, is it all? Well, okay. So yeah. So the Ravens are spending bigger on defense. It's been a big a big question for me the whole Lamar tenure. Steelers, I think were first for most this season, but I guess in early March when these figures, you know, were compiled on overthecap.com, they were second. But um yeah,
Still
again,
high. That's still
yeah,
very high.
the impact of not having to pay a QB are down at 31 for offensive spending.
And that's kind of where you wonder when does that shift need to happen? You
Mhm.
know, when we eventually do get our franchise QB, whoever that may be, and whenever it happens, how are you going to afford it? And you're going to have to sacrifice somewhere. I mean, so and it'll most likely have to be the defense. But hopefully, you know, the Omar Khan just has potential trades lined up or just has to make some tough business decisions on who to keep, who to cut, and things like that. So huge difference, yeah, between like where the Ravens are for offense versus the Steelers is crazy. Yeah. But it's funny because the Browns are ranked number 5 with 194 million on their offensive cap. I wasn't given how their offense performs, I wasn't expecting the spending to be like that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a ghost that's like almost literally haunting their salary cap in this phantom contract for a guy that is never around when they want him to. But now, you know, he seems like his cap is making noises that he wants to be the starter. So he might come in and when no one wants him there anymore, come back and try to force his foot in the door. So yeah, it was funny to see like I mean, they're so high in offensive spending. So even though we think of them as this big defensive team spending like a record amount on Myles Garrett, there's still only 20 versus there's only so much money you can have left over for the defense when you're paying like top tier money for your QB. So
You-
yeah. So yeah, so that this is again, you know,
those massages aren't cheap, man.
but they don't count against the cap. So, you know, there's at least that. So
That's the PT for his injuries.
right.
Anyway,
Yeah. So Um, yeah, so now jumping into what actually happened here, right? Yeah, I mean, it's just selfishly here as a Ravens fan, that's where my eye goes first here. And it's like, you know, wow, shocking that the Ravens are, you know, still taking the checkbook out for the defense, even after after already being, you know, seventh in defensive spending before free agency with huge holes on offense. You know, they're still, you know, way below average in defensive spending and right around average. So way below in offensive spending and about average in defensive spending. Well, yeah, and there's the Steelers there. So,
very
do you have any
close.
big picture thoughts there, Ryan, on the Steelers?
No, I mean it. I'm not surprised to see that we're below average for the offensive spending and above average for the defensive spending. So it's where I would expect it to be. What kind of surprises me, not to go off topic, is to see how much spending on the defense the Rams are, right kind of below there. And on the offensive side, not as much, but I'm sure that'll change once the Puka contract goes through. But anyway,
Right.
to focus back on the AFC North, yeah, for the Steelers, right where I expected him to be. And then with the Bengals, yeah, with defensive spending, same on average, which is so the Bengals and the Ravens spent the same amount on defense, and we saw how that ended up last
Right.
year. But
Yeah.
and the Browns, yeah, kind of like the graphic before, below average spending on defense, but up there in offensive spending. And again, funny that given how their offense performed in 2025, the fact that they spent so much on offense, it's just, yeah, head scratcher.
Yeah. So wanted to jump into a couple graphics here. This is from at SF Data Niners. Really good account on Twitter. So I thought that, looking at the sort of, I view these as sort of indicators for how all in a team is. So, average age with the younger at the top here. The Ravens, and this is pretty much just all Trey Hendrickson, but the Ravens with the third oldest free agent class, they're at 30 years old, and the Steelers right behind them. Like in that respect, you know, these are vet heavy teams, and if you do want to build a team and you want to win right now, the value is in those older players. Yeah, does this surprise you at all? Right?
I mean, I thought the Steelers would be older with Aaron Rodgers potentially by himself, like raising that
Oh, right.
average because even in 2025, he was 41, 42 ish. And then this year he's supposed to turn 43. So I thought him alone would raise that average. I thought honestly that the Steelers would on average be older than the Ravens. I mean, it's very comparable, 29.88 and 30. So I mean, they're right there, but I would say that was actually what surprised me. And then of course, Bengals and Browns. Browns is at 28.62 and the Bengals are at 29. All younger teams. Um I mean, even
Yeah.
in the quarterbacks too, right? For the Browns. I mean, it's Shador and Dylan
Mhm.
Gabriel, and then yeah, you have Deshaun Watson, but
Yeah.
even
But this is
he's
just
not
for the free
yeah,
agents. So this is
for
only
the
for
free
the newly
agency. Oh,
signed,
the newly
guys. But
signed. Yeah.
but but yeah, they're right around, this is kind of not, maybe this is more indicative of the extremes, I think, for like our teams, but yeah, the range in the middle is pretty tight. So
Yeah. Yeah.
um but this next one here is one that I think is one of the most shocking, right? This is a real, the most, I think, concrete index for like how all in a team is how much money you're pushing into void years. So I think the Ravens were kind of hesitant to do that at first. And then I think once they saw like the Eagles and other teams winning Super Bowls with it, they kind of whipped out their credit card. And, you know, I know you know this much more even than I do, but yeah, it's all about the time value of money, right? That the salary cap's going up every year. So if you push that 10 million bonus in like 2 years from now, that's a much smaller percentage of that rising salary cap. So,
Yeah.
it's become the kind of the meta, right, to push that all out to future years. And so the Ravens, no surprise, are seventh. And again, it is just unbelievable, of course, to see how much the Deshaun Watson contract like steers the entire Cleveland boat. It's the tail that wags the
That's
dog of this
brutal.
entire team. Yeah, it's just
Brutal.
they're second in, as if they're the most all in team when they're the team that is really just in hell right now. Trying to get
Yeah,
rid of that stuff.
100%.
Yeah.
It makes you
But
laugh, though.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean,
yeah, they deserve
that's
it. They
too
deserve
bad.
it 100%, right? This
That was
is
bad.
yeah. But oh, this is one thing that I've seen. So I've seen a ton of talk online about this. The Bengals fans are furious that they're in a win now window, but they are not using this sort of very, what I think is an incontrovertibly really strong strategy, I think, right? Just given how much the salary cap has been jumping in recent years to push the money out into later years. And it's not even really sacrificing that much of your, I don't think it's necessarily mortgaging your future, uh, you know, to use it to some degree just because the cap's going up, right?
Yeah.
But the Bengals here at 22nd, they're basically not using this at all. I'm guessing this is like
No.
the 2031 is probably like a Burrow contract clause or something like that. But they're basic with a flat cap. You're just never going to maximize your competitiveness in any given year, which I think is a mistake if you have a quarterback that's in their prime. So 22 there for the Bengals, 27th though for the Steelers. I don't know about you, Ryan, but I haven't seen a lot of chatter from Steelers fans that are angry about this the way I have with the Bengals fans. But the Steelers are not using void years at all, which is shocking to me. And combined with how much cap space and draft capital they have, I mean this almost looks like a team that's kind of hedging that if the bottom does fall out this year, that they have a lot of flexibility in future years to kind of rebuild or make moves. But yeah, what are your thoughts? Would you want them to kind of be whipping out the credit card a little bit with Mike McCarthy coming on and new talent on the coaching staff?
I would want to do that if they had the talent on the team. I mean, you think a lot about like who's on the team currently, and Rodgers is on like a year to year, and plenty of the other players. I mean, even the free agency signings. I mean, it's like 2, 3, at most 4 years that they're signing them for. So it's not, and they're not for gigantic contracts. So, with who's on the team right now, I would, I don't mind that they're not overpaying them. And like you said, in case the bottom does fall out, they have some liquidity to make some big purchases versus when they do have their franchise quarterback, whenever that may be, I can then see more money being spent, for those void years. But right now, with who's on the team, I just don't think there's anyone worth spending that money on, at least with the current team. But if they had their franchise QB, or they just brought in more talent that's worth that, then of course, yeah, I mean, it works for the Eagles, and I don't see why it wouldn't work for the Steelers. But I think a lot of it too comes down to the management. I mean, Pittsburgh is kind of notoriously cheap on their facilities, and like they were ranked like a failing grade for team like family stuff. And so I think that the Steelers just like don't want to spend a lot of money, and they want to be flexible, which to some degree I understand. But also, like, if you're not willing to spend the money, then you can't expect to get the best top tier talent. And we saw in the prior graphic with the homegrown talent, I mean, it's like you're bringing in all these different people on relatively cheap contracts. So I mean, I wouldn't expect to see big numbers, in these void years, at least as of now. But hopefully once you get the quarterback, you get more pieces in place, they'll probably start doing this a little bit more. But with the talent that they currently have, it doesn't surprise me to see that it's all zeros right now.
Yeah, it's just so funny that just having just sort of just seen this Cheetos culture from afar, just seeing the way that their philosophy just keeps kind of cropping up, that they probably see these other teams doing it and just think, oh, that's not very prudent, or that's just not us. Like they have this conservative sort of view of not kind of dipping their toe into these like sort of aggressive strategies when they become kind of the league meta that everyone's talking about and adopting. So
Yeah, very, very low risk tolerance. I mean, just looking at TJ Watt's contract, how long it took to get that figured out. Because like, oh, I mean, he's great, but I don't really want to spend the money. And then eventually they gave in. And do I think that gigantic contract was worth it? I mean, TJ's performance has declined year after year. So again, I think like if you use TJ Watt as an example, they're like, oh, I mean, we paid him all this money and his performance is declining. It's like, do we really want to do that with anyone else? And then, of course, the answer is no, until they have, again, those pieces in place. When that happens, though, I don't know. Like, I don't know if Pittsburgh, is it just their culture to not want to spend money?
Right.
So
Right.
it could continue to be this way. But if that happens, then this number is going to be, these numbers will continue to be zero. I'm curious though how they did it with Ben Roethlisberger's contract. Like, I wonder how, if at that time, because we had a franchise QB, how are they working on his contract? Was it similar to this, where there was not much in the void years, or because it was the franchise QB that did win 2 Super Bowls, that they were willing to have money spent in these void years? I don't know the answer to that. I'd be interested to see, but again, like the prior graphic, it doesn't surprise me at all that they're at 27 for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's just basically, if you look at this, they're 27th, but they could be 32. I mean, there's like 6 teams at the bottom here that just aren't using it at all. Like not a dollar push it to void years. So, another thing that was interesting here is that if you look at New Orleans at 9, obviously they're still in the top 10, but this is kind of what Cleveland could look like once the Watson contract gets off the books, right? So in maybe 2029, they'll have, like 88, right, in void
Yeah.
years.
Yeah.
And New Orleans, that's right where they are right now. So you can just see like the clouds kind of lifting on New Orleans, and they could kind of shift with the new coach right into that competitive window if they're able to land a QB and
Yeah.
start getting aggressive in a couple years. So their window could be about to open. Obviously, we hope Cleveland doesn't follow that route, but they'll have options in a couple years. So
You don't think Tyler Shuck is the answer for New Orleans?
yeah, I mean, that is a big L for me, I will say. I thought that guy was like a day 3 type of guy, and he's definitely not. So I'll definitely eat some crow on that. But yeah, I mean, they're at least kind of watchable, right? Which is more than you can say for the Browns. So
Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, so that was, again, I just wanted to kind of step back and see how all in are we, and again, mixed signals from the Steelers here. So now we're going to jump kind of more into the nitty gritty, right, of what actually went down in the free agency period. So Steelers actually did do some spending here. This is just based on sort of my look at sort of the top APY spending. So this is not the guaranteed spending total, and there's a bunch of ways that you can kind of look at how much people spent, right? But Steelers pretty balanced. Browns got to rebuild the offense. Ravens again saying that defense is the top priority, and the Bengals needing to correct some things on defense. So it's not surprising that they spent, right.
Yeah.
So yeah, they get into the exact figures, right? The Ravens. So just kind of looking at the top sort of APY, which I think is the better way to look at it, right? How in the average yearly contract, right? Of a $10 million a year player, how much did they shell out? So, Steelers kind of did spend a little bit here. So yeah, we'll get into the nitty gritty later. But did you have any thoughts, Ryan, on kind of the balance here between the two, or the total just kind of figures of the spending in the last sort of month or two of that free agent frenzy?
Well, I'm glad that it wasn't just all defense, because that would have really disappointed me, especially with just over the years how much the Steelers have invested in their defense. I'm glad that it wasn't all defense again. They recognize that They needed help on offense, and granted, it was really just primarily 2 players on offense that they signed, and they had a whole bunch on defense, so it's I guess for me, I'm glad it wasn't all defense, like it has been in years past, and they've recognized that they needed some help on offense, and were willing to open up the checkbook and to help the offense, basically.
Yeah, and for the Ravens, it's just, I mean, they just got a new defensive head coach, right? And that's where the money went, right? Like I think it's pretty clear that Minter has some influence, right, on the personnel. So, you know,
And
um,
that could be the same argument for the Steelers too, since they now have a offensive head coach, that it ended up being a little bit more balanced on the spending than if Tomlin were still there, for example.
yeah. So yeah, jumping into kind of the all of the details here on the actual, signings and losses. This is mostly from overthecap.com. Again, if you're an old head on salary cap stuff, to go to overthecap.com and not Spotrac because, kind of over the cap's kind of the OG of, doing all of this research, and a lot of Spotrac initially, kind of is kind of riding their coattails a little bit. But so we got the, of course, the player and age here. And, again, I thought the best way to look at these contracts is what's the average per year, that they're going to get paid in millions here. Over the Cap has their own sort of proprietary formula for evaluation. It's kind of it there's a quality and a quantity factor to it. So it takes into account different metrics like PFF grades and other sort of, key metrics for each position, and assigns them kind of what they feel that player's play was worth. But it doesn't really it doesn't they have some injury formulas, but even that doesn't really capture, shortened seasons very well. So, for example, right at the top here, it's easy to see Hendrickson, their evaluation of him, $3 million in last year. Obviously, he's worth more than that, right?
3 I saw
Yeah,
that, I was like, "Really?"
yeah, but just for that very limited season that he played before the injury, right? And
Yeah.
so, and then I just sort of took the overall offensive or defensive grade from PFF just to give a quick snapshot. Again, we're not trying to co-sign their grades at all, but just wanted to give some perspective on how a third party does look at them, because obviously as fans we're going to have our own feelings. And then what snap from scrimmage percentage they played last year. So of course, 26% for Trey Hendrickson. And then the total guarantees do sort of give a sense of, how much are they truly invested long term in the player. So for the Ravens, again, a huge fiasco, right, with Trey Hendrickson and Max Crosby. Yeah, I would of course much rather have had Max Crosby as a player, but is the difference worth 2 first-round picks? I think the answer is clearly no. And, again, I think it's a testament to Max Crosby that he plays so hard, plays through injury. You may have seen some people brought up uh, some of his own info that he put out there, that he played through an infection in his knee a couple years ago, which can, of course, have some long-term effects. So um, I think that they just, didn't feel comfortable with the medicals over the long term, and then went with Trey Hendrickson. I don't really love this move, even though I think it's better than the Max Crosby signing. And maybe we'll get into this more later, but that's just a fact of the matter. At $28 million, that's a big investment for a 32-year-old player. And again, you don't have to look very far to see that. That was the big headliner signing of this free agency period for the Ravens, even though on the right-hand side, you can see just a whole wealth of offensive talent going out the door, and really um, not a serious attempt to keep those guys in the building, I guess. So really defensive heavy at the top. And, I don't think I'm bringing anything new to the table here and saying that the John Simpson John Simpson is just a very limited player, and the Ravens more than anyone should know that. He wasn't great years ago, and now we're getting the 29-year-old version of him with a better O-line coach. But again, a 29-year-old I don't think is going to improve much. And I think one of the biggest issues with John Simpson is the penalties, which, a lot of sort of different metrics and, tables, graphs, a lot of different sort of advanced analytics don't take into account penalties. They just look at, snaps from scrimmage. And Simpson doesn't even really look that great in a lot of those other metrics either. But when you factor in the penalties, he's just a pretty well below average player. I just don't know that anyone was kind of banging on the door to sign John Simpson. So with the whole interior offensive line, hitting free agency or probably getting demoted, with Voorhees the left guard, Lily at right guard, still unsigned, still a free agent, and obviously Linderbaum leaving. To have John Simpson be like, you're out of the entire league of guards, your number one priority to bring in is shocking to me. I think one of the funny things in the Max Crosby story that he's telling is how he wasn't able to talk much to Eric DaCosta, the GM. And I'm not going to say that there was nothing shady. We can't know that. I personally just do think that the medicals were surprisingly bad, that they weren't expecting that. But I think the fact that Max wasn't able to talk to Eric DaCosta much until later isn't that surprising, given that he got there in the building on literally the busiest day of the entire calendar for a front office executive, which is day one of the tampering period, right? So the thing that I just think is funny, though, is that while he was watching all of these players go out the door, a lot of them on day one, the day one signing of the tampering period for the Ravens was John Simpson, and at $10 million a year. So I just, for those being just by far the marquee talents to bring in on their side of the ball, I think that is just a really, really poor showing. I don't know. Did you have any thoughts on on these guys, Ryan?
I think what blew me away the most was just how many people left. And I mean, real contributors too left. I mean, Tyler Linderbaum being like a huge hole now for you guys. And there were a lot more talented free agent O-linemen this period. And for the Ravens to go with John Simpson was pretty surprising to me as well. I mean, you look at the over the cap valuation for him was $6 million, and the Ravens paid him $10 million a year. And yeah, $10 million is a lot for John Simpson. And then it looks like the Ravens also signed 3 centers as depth pieces. I don't know if that means that they're really going to try and grab one in the draft. I'm not too sure. I mean, they chose well when they drafted Linderbaum. So who's to say that, they can't choose another one? I mean, first round, there's probably not going to be any centers that go. It's going to just be tackles and probably the one guard, Ioane. So, day 2, day 3, they might find another center, but way more losses than gains in this free agency period for the Ravens. And yeah, that's pretty rough.
Yeah, and again, looking at the signals from the other graphs, right, that we're third oldest in terms of the free agent class, that we're top 7 in leverage in terms of pushing money into future void years. Like, we should be all in, right? If you look at every statement from literally the very top from our owner on down, it's that we're committing to win this year. And then you have, I mean, and I'm so glad you pointed that out, Ryan, because yeah, these 3 guys at the bottom here, I mean, you can't expect literally anything from those guys. I mean, you just can't. It's just, they're just not serious contenders for any starting spot on any roster in the league. And even Danny Pinder, that's kind of a weird one. I actually just, most of the data here, of course, is just taken straight off of overthecap.com, but nowhere online actually has an official figure for his signing, even though he's obviously on the books on overthecap.com. So it's been reported at $2.5 million. And even that to me is an overspend. I don't think anyone else is banging the door to pay this Danny Pinter over the vet min. He's barely been a factor, just been just a pure reserve spot starter his whole career. Maybe roll some of those up into like a slightly bigger, you know, talent. But I mean, these are just guys that you just could not count on at all in any serious way. Like to be a contending team and go through either, um, either a I think late second round is the highest valued at this point consensus center in the draft, unless you consider Fano, right? That's not a guy that you can just plug in day one, right? I don't think you can plug in any of these guys. So just go in there to tell Lamar the guy touching the ball every snap is gonna be just a basically like a camp body type guy or a rookie is just unbelievable to me. I mean, they had to have known that Linderbaum was going to get a big contract, and there just was clearly no planning for the future at all on their part.
Or urgency as well. I mean, that's a big. I mean, like you said, there's a huge hole now in the offensive line. The leader of the offensive line is gone, and to replace him with, I mean, Pinter 13%, Gwynn and Bullock 1%. I mean, just no experience dudes, and it's. I'm sure Lamar is looking at that. I was like, guys. I mean, how do we go from someone like Linderbaum to like these guys? I mean, how can you expect me? I mean, you're going to want me to throw the ball more. I'm going to need the protection for it. I'm going to be scrambling for my life on every other play. It's kind of like what Joe Burrow has had to do for like the last how many years is just like scrambling and not figuring out. And, just kind of going back to a few episodes in 2026, will we see that under center percentage like go down? Like is Lamar going to have to go and play more shotgun, like all of those kinds of things. But that's all directly related to not prioritizing protection for Lamar.
And it's just the thing. So for like Edge, for example, there's a lot of talent that's out there that's unsigned right now. And so I think that they're waiting till after the June 1st time where they don't count against the compensatory picks to make some moves there. At center, there's no one. There's no one on the street right now. Every center with talent is on a roster right now and got paid decently, right? But there were guys around for in the $8 million range, like Cade Mays, going to the Lions. They thought they had a plan. They got surprised by their center retiring, and then they turned right around and got a middle of the road starter in Cade Mays for a pretty, value deal, I think, of $8 million. Whereas the Ravens had years to plan for Linderbaum becoming a free agent, and they just have no plan in place at all. So this is a deep draft for centers. There's great talent from round 3 to 7 to undrafted probably. But those are guys that you would want when your center's going to be a free agent in 2 years, not when he is a free agent, a month ago.
Yeah.
So, this is it's just a tough look. And again, maybe they're just waiting, right? So 2 of my top for guard, obviously this is not center, but for guard, 2, I think bringing in some just like blooded AFC North veterans like Kevin Zeitler, Joel Bitonio. I think both those guys are still free agents. I would love for them to bring those guys in, and they might still, right? And for cheap.
Yep.
But to put John Simpson at the absolute top of your offensive priority list is I don't know how you plan for a whole year for free agency, and that's your plan. So yeah, I've been pretty negative, of course, but on defense they did make some interesting additions here. Jalen Hawkins from the Patriots, one of the top graded safeties from Pro Football Focus. He's a UDFA. Very, very similar to a guy we'll probably talk about a little bit later on, James Pierre, kind of the mirror of him. Just a UDFA, got his one season to prove himself and looked really good, obviously. But against a really, really easy schedule. But at $5 million a year, I think with just $5 million guaranteed, that's a really, really low risk signing. That's the upside is really there for that contract. Awuzie, I think, is the number 10 graded corner from PFF. Um, I mean, he grades well in every metric basically, and I assumed he would get at least 10 million, but I guess given his age at 31 and some injury history, this market was pretty soft, I guess. But that's a great signing. Durham Smythe, they're talking him up a lot as kind of a Swiss Army knife. He basically is the phasing out of the fullback role here in Baltimore. So, Pancake Pat Ricard, is leaving. There's basically no metric you can point to say that Durham Smythe is a really good player, to be honest. But I think the versatility does have some value to them. He's coming over, a guy that they're bringing over from Chicago. So, but obviously he had two really great tight ends ahead of him doing most of the work. So, I don't know how much stock to put into that. And yeah, so in terms of the losses, again, the Linderbaum, it makes sense, right? He's completely reset the market, maybe to a degree that I don't think we've ever seen before at any position. For a 3-year deal, is amazing. So I understand not paying him, but you can't then not have any contingency. Likely, I understand him leaving. That's a pretty big figure, right? But you're mentioning the loyalty that the Steelers have. The Ravens had that too from Mark Andrews, but I can understand not trading him, but to then give him the same money that likely would have taken Mark Andrews. I mean, he's not included in the figures here, but he was obviously kind of part of their plans, extending him during the season. SIS has their total points metric. It's kind of like the OTC, over the cap valuation, where there's a bit of a snap, cumulative effect of it, but also quality, right? So you're not just going to compile. You can have a bunch of tackles as a defensive player, but have a negative points rating if you're not producing value, if you're not creating quality stops. Mark Andrews minus 10 points receiving on the season, which is one of the lowest figures I've ever seen for a tight end. Basically, no one that inefficient gets the ball that much, and he's at the bottom, near the bottom of the league in yards per reception for tight ends this year. It just fell off a cliff. So again, to see where the league is going, that meta that we talked about in the last couple of episodes, where you have an offensive coordinator who just had this 1-2 punch of Colston Loveland, Cole Kmet, they had their tight end 3, Durham Smythe. We have that guy, but we don't have a Cole Kmet. We definitely don't have a Colston Loveland. So we could have had our Cole Kmet with Charlie Kohler for $8 million a year. That's a lot for a guy who's mostly a blocker, but he was a guy that I really wanted to have them keep because he, I think, is an example of their development, right? Like, he came in as this sort of like a low BMI receiving tight end, which is a little, I don't love that archetype because you probably aren't going to be able to be a blocker, right? He was like 6'6", 240 something in the draft, I think. He's listed now at 262, I think. So he's really put on a lot of an actual real muscle, I think, over the past few years, with Mark Andrews unlikely in front of him catching the ball. The only role there was to block for him. So he, to his credit, remade his body and his game into like a block first tight end. And I think that's the kind of commitment that should be rewarded, but instead they're just letting him walk for $8 million a year, which is, not
It's a
nothing.
lot.
But, he was a guy I was hoping that they would keep. Ollie Gilman, he was just kind of a rental from the Chargers. I don't think that that's a big deal. Heath Mitchell, a guy that they just clearly had no vision for ever. So it's not surprising they let him walk. He did make more than like the restricted free agent tender. Almost $5 million. That's a lot, right? Jordan Stout, was it worth spending a 4th round pick on him and then letting him walk? I probably wouldn't have paid him $4 million a year. I think that the Browns brought in Corey Bojorquez for half that, I think. So that's probably a much better deal. So I get not not signing him. Ricard, again, is just the offense has to grow beyond him at this point. So I think that's fine to let him go. But Darius Washington for just $3 million, that's another one like Kohler where he's a UDFA that we invested a lot of time in. I watched some interviews with him. He basically just said, what's the maximum rehab I can do? Like, what's the most work I can do to get back quickly from his Achilles tear? He did all of that to come back and try to contribute in the same season, where in the preseason he tore his Achilles, which is amazing to me. And yeah, maybe again, their medicals, they were thought he didn't look good. I don't know, but he's the kind of guy that, I thought should be rewarded for at least a $3 million contract. To see him leave for that little, I think is pretty disappointing. And I think that's the last guy on this list that is a real contributor. But yeah, again, to be all in, right? Just like you've said, just to look at all these losses. I mean, we're just not a better team right now in personnel. Obviously, coaches do matter. That's why we spend so much time on it. But you just can't really spin this as a better team at this point right now. And there were, a lot of good deals to be made. I think we'll talk about some of the ones the Steelers did, but guys like Sayumalo leaving for, not much more than John Simpson, a guy who, PFF grade 56.9, not an outlier. He's been around that level his whole career, you know, is disappointing. But yeah, any other thoughts on seeing your most hated rival here just get cut out by free agency?
I'm good. We can move on to the Steelers.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry. I know I went a bit long on there, but
No,
yeah,
no
I had
worries.
to get that off my chest here.
Yeah.
But yeah, Ryan, take us away on the Steelers.
Moving on to the Steelers, overall, I've been pretty satisfied with the signings so far. I feel like definitely outside of Seumalo, I was totally okay with all the rest of them leaving. I mean, Kenneth Gainwell was the team's offensive player of the year, and it was definitely well deserved. I would have liked to keep him as well, but I think that the Steelers did well in basically replacing him with Rico Dowdle. And I think that Gainwell and Warren kind of had pretty similar play styles. And so now with Rico Dowdle, you kind of have the 1-2 punch that really works to each player's strength. So I was pretty satisfied with that signing as well. Michael Pittman Jr., great signing, at least for me. He's very consistent, good route runner, short to intermediate routes, will help you move the chains forward. And that's really, especially if Rodgers comes back or by chance Will Howard ends up being the starter, just having that reliable guy to move the chains was a great person. And so that way the Steelers really need to kind of just focus on a wide receiver 3 or just, depth for the future. Jamel Dean, I thought, was an excellent signing for how well he's played his whole career, being on the opposite side to Joey Porter Jr. I think that that's going to be a very dependable cornerbacks for the Steelers. Keanu Benton for the last couple years, as the nose tackle-ish kind of position, he's like decent at pass rush, but horrible in the run defense. And so signing someone like Joseph Day kind of fills that need. He can be that early down run stuffer. Asante Samuel, good depth piece. I mean, he's all right. And then Darnell Savage, I mean, he's all right too. I mean, very athletic, but yeah, he's a backup at this point. Steelers signed Brock Hoffman, which I don't know. I wouldn't have paid $2.5 million for him because he's also more of like a depth piece versus like who your everyday starter is going to be. And then, Jaquan Brisker, he's good, no doubt about it. And as you can see here, what the Steelers are paying him is pretty much what over the cap valuated him to be. So I think that's kind of just right where he needs to be. Of course, the worry is the concussions, but I think in this draft, Pittsburgh will definitely need to find a safety for the future. Since I mean, Brisker is not old by any means because he's only 27, but you know, by pro standards, you're starting to get there, right? And Deshaun Elliott is also not going to be around forever, so Pittsburgh definitely needs to plan for that. And then yeah, moving on to the losses, Seumalo is the biggest one for me. I mean, last year, and then when he was with the Eagles as well, he's just been a real steady rock on the offensive line, both in pass protection and run blocking. And so that's going to be a big hole to fill. I would have liked the Steelers to hang on to him for sure, but yeah, it is what it is. I do like James Pierre. I mean, he was a really good nickelback, and I think again, him leaving, it sucks, but you know, it's not the end of the world, at least for me. Calvin Austin, he didn't contribute much at all. Same with Connor Hayward. He was like there for the tush push, and then that was pretty much it. Like, he didn't do anything else. So, you know, overall, I'm definitely more happy than not. You know, with the Steelers free agency, I feel like they filled a number of holes that they needed to, and the losses weren't devastating like Linderbaum. So for me, yeah, overall, I was happy with how this offseason went, but Steelers definitely need to really figure out that left side of the line. I mean, Seumalo leaving and with Dylan Cook and Broderick Jones at left tackle, I mean, Jones has not lived up to his first round pick. And so while Fautanu could move to the left side because that's where he also played in college, that right side is just solid. And so if we could just keep that, that would be great. And then, you know, Pittsburgh just needs to figure out the left side of the line, and, you know, we'll see how they address that in the draft, or, you know, June 1 as well. We'll see how that plays out, because there are some guards still out there that definitely are better than say like Brock Hoffman moving over to the left guard position. But I don't know. How do you feel, Matt, so far with the Steelers free
Yeah.
agency moves?
I mean, I what's first is I almost have more to say about the Steelers haul than I do the Ravens, to be honest. You know, I mean, obviously part of it is that, you know, if you draft like the Ravens do, you're going to have some hits that you can't pay, right? And they're going to walk, right? So Steelers didn't necessarily have that problem this year. But I mean, the Steelers to me look like the team that's trying to win more than the Ravens based on what they did in free agency, you know?
Yeah.
I guess we haven't even really talked about the comp picks, but I think John Simpson is an unrestricted free agent. So I think by signing him, you're wiping the comp pick from Linderbaum off the board too. So you're giving up like a third round pick that you could have used to sign a legitimate guard or center just to pay this guy $10 million. I mean, just for the privilege, you know, it just doesn't make sense to me. And even Brock Hoffman, you know, he's a guy that he's been relevant in the league. Like he's put in real snaps in recent years, including last year, and he's only 27. So the arrow could really be pointing up on him. Like he could still be a talent that hasn't really been uncovered yet. Danny Pinter, like those guys, I mean, are either older or just they have shown absolutely nothing to where they'd be worth that. But I think 2.5 million, yeah, that's not nothing, but I think that's a decent bet on a guy who might have some untapped upside, you know?
Better than 10 million for sure.
Yeah.
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 And he does have that McCarthy connection from Dallas. So
Right.
I'm sure McCarthy has some level of faith in him. Whether he's like the future, I guess, is to be seen, since he's been a backup. But like you said, 40% of snaps is that's good. You know, that's not like you're not playing versus the 1% like in the previous slide.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Like if those guys retired next year, we'd be like, wait, when's the last time they played? Right. You know?
no
So
one would care.
yeah. And yeah, just going down the list here, like, man, like it's just wild that one of the big narratives is just how much a wide receiver is worth now, right? And to just, for so little get Michael Pittman on it. Obviously, you're paying him a decent amount, but for the new world of WR evaluations, that's not a lot of money, and the risk is capped, right? You don't have a bunch of huge amount of future guarantees beyond next year in him. So,
No,
um, and yeah, dang, Jamel Dean, a really good signing. Of course, I think Awuzie, is only making like much less than half of what Dean is making, but he, to me, is one of the top like free agents, like of that period, and you were able to land him. So I think that's a pretty big deal. And Joseph Day too. I mean, he's pretty versatile, So there's a lot of ways he can find a way to fit on the line. And I think from what I've seen, a lot of people praising him in Tennessee is like he was like one of the most fiery and competitive guys on a team that, is arguably the worst in the league, right? So he's the guy that coming over to a winning franchise, like, you could really see like him make a big impact this year. So that's the guy I would have liked to see on the Ravens too. And of course he's of course he's on the Steelers. So um yeah, dang. I mean, I think that's like a really good, really balanced haul. And yeah, I think really really great work. Like I wouldn't want the Steelers roster, but I do find pretty often that, like, yeah, in any given window, I do like the moves they make. I like last year's draft. I like this year's free agency for the Steelers. So, good work. Although, yeah, obviously, I would have wanted CML to come over on the Ravens for $500,000 more than 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 John Simpson. But yeah, at least he's not playing for the Steelers anymore.
I'll miss that guy for sure.
Mm.
But if we end up drafting Vega, we'll continue on the that trend of offensive linemen after Falatanu last year. So yeah, we'll see how that goes.
All right, so moving on to the Bengals. I kind of struggle with the Bengals because I think that they're not the Browns, but they have a winning. They've been in the Super Bowl obviously more recently than any of our teams, but I still feel like they're seen as one of these bad franchises, right? So you have to pay that bad franchise tax to bring in a free agent. I think people know the facilities are bad. And obviously the Steelers didn't score very well either. But you look at those contracts; those are all right around the market projection, right, for most of those players. Whereas you look at the Bengals, and it's a little different, right? So Boye Mafe at 20 million dollars a year. That's a lot of money. Like that's
That's a
really a
lot.
lot. So on the plus side, he's 28, really athletic. He can contribute on every down. He's got enough athleticism to play the run, and obviously rush the passer. But from a lot of the analysis that I've seen, he's kind of limited in terms of his pass rush toolbox, and he's been in the league long enough that he should develop more, right? So if you're skeptical of Mafe, Mike McDonald, arguably the best defensive mind in the league, kind of came in, looked at him, and was like, benched him, you know, brought Derek Hall up in the rotation, and they basically didn't look back. They kind of put him in a rotation, but did not want to make him the centerpiece. They saw Derek Hall was the future, and they won a Super Bowl with that. So to then turn around and pay a guy who really is just a part-time player last year $20 million is it just doesn't seem like a high up. There's no upside there at 20 million left. There's just no way he outplays that.
And I agree too. And you touched on it too, that Seattle's defense was just so good that he was able to just be a part-time player and have the impact that he did. But then you bring him over to Cincinnati, where they don't have that same level of defense, where they don't have that same level of defensive line alone, and you're going to place these high and expensive expectations on him. I mean, I hope he does well, but that's a lot to place on a guy that only did so much on the Seattle defense.
Yeah. I mean, it's a shocking number. And you've got Trey Hendrickson leaving, so that's who he's replacing. So on the one hand, Hendrickson also, I think they found ways to protect him, right? Like keep him on some rundowns, but not so much that he couldn't go full blast on every passing down, and that's why all his metrics look so good, right? So they kind of understand how to keep a guy like him fresh and at his best to contribute. But yeah, 20 million, we just saw, the Steelers, Joseph Day for like what, 5 million, that ballpark, right? A guy who can really, make everyone around him better. All these different sort of other pieces you could have added. And Mafe just doesn't seem like a guy you're going to make like the crown jewel of your class. Brian Cook, yeah, 13 million. That's about what a good safety gets paid nowadays. Like last year, we saw a bunch of guys get, around that amount. He's got 1 year of production that came with the new coaching staff. It's a gamble, but if you listen to any Bengals fan, they're just always talking about how bad the safety play is. So it's a reasonable bet on a decently young player that may have some upside still. Flacco is what he is. I think well worth $6 million. Reisner, a really surprising contract to me. That's another guy that I don't think is a great player by any means, but arguably better than John Simpson. And for literally one third of the cost. I mean, 3.3 million. Like that guy needs a new agent. Like that's nothing. That's less than 1 mil more than Danny Pinter, who's barely played in the league. He's an every down guy. He's been an every down guy for a long time. So.
I swear you're not bitter or resentful at all.
Man, anytime a flag comes out on a run play or a pass play near the line, I'm gonna know who did it.
Oh man. Oh my goodness.
But yeah, I think that's pretty much it for like meaningful contributors. And so again, that's not a long list, right? For a Super Bowl window team that has one of the worst defenses in the league and has some room to spend on defense just because they've got nothing there. And when you're that bad, putting that 20 million into Boye Mafe looks a lot worse to me.
Yeah.
There's a lot of ways you could have gotten better than putting all of those eggs in that one basket.
Yeah.
But yeah, again, Joseph Osai leaving for 11.5 million. I mean, I don't think he is worth that, So from that perspective, yeah, Mafe is probably worth double what Osai got paid, but again, if you don't draft well, you're not going to be too broken up about the guys that leave. So I think that's kind of the story for the rest of this list. I don't think you'd expect any of these guys to be like welcomed with open arms by their new team, like he's their savior at that position. So
definitely.
Yeah. Moving on to the Browns. Again, this is where I think that tax comes into play, right? So they trade for Titus Howard, hand him a new contract for $22 million per year. And I think it seems like they told him, you're going to be a tackle, right? You want to be a tackle, you're going to be a tackle, right? And that's where he's struggled the most in his career. But he wants to be a tackle, and he found a place that was going to let him do that and pay him a lot of money for that. So that's the Browns, right? But from a 10,000 foot, yeah. Yeah. That when you're not a winning franchise, that's what you got to do. So, but from a 1,000 foot perspective, that O-line that we were talking about, that's going to be all free agents. They spent big to try to fill those holes, and they have a lot of draft capital to fill that in the draft. So they're set up pretty well, I think. And the one guy they kept, Tevin Jenkins, $4 million, he's injured all the time, but at $4 million, you're not going to worry too much about that. But some of these contracts, man, like Zion Johnson, he's still young, but $16.5 million. That's a lot for a guy who's been injured most years and ineffective most years. That really is just we liked him in the draft like 4 or 5 years ago. He's got to be a good player, right? Let's pay him $16.5 million. Like they haven't checked up on him in all these years, So I guess the question is, he played next to Bradley Bozeman, former Raven, who was basically bullied out of the league by the Chargers fan base. Like, he literally retired last month. So maybe next to like a better a line, maybe Zion will be unlocked more. But again, I don't think there's really much upside at all in paying him $16.5 million.
It's a lot.
It's a lot.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
And yeah, like I agree from a high level view, it looks like the Browns made the the right investments in retooling their offensive line that was basically non-existent. But when you dive into how much these guys are getting paid, given the injury histories, the inconsistencies, and all of those kinds of things, it's like, okay, well, at least you guys did address the O line. Did you address them with the right guys? There's a whole nother conversation for how much you're paying them, et cetera, et cetera. But Brown's doing Brown's things.
Yeah. And I again, I think they might have offered a bunch of these guys who aren't on this list money, and they just said, I don't want to play for Cleveland. I'll take $1 million or $2 million less. I'll play somewhere that I want to, get in the locker room and into a celebration rather than another loss like every week. So,
Too funny. It is too funny. The
yeah. And
Browns,
so,
they never cease to disappoint.
no, yeah, it's, you think you're going to get an even bigger contract playing for the Browns? You're not going to shine there. Right. So
It's about the money at that point.
Yeah, but that's the whole thing. Are you capping your future money by going to a terrible franchise where you're going to lose a bunch of games and not have any talent next to you? That next contract might not be there, where you might just cruise on a winning team like the Eagles, get on their line or whatever, and look amazing, and then your next contract is there for you.
Yeah.
And yeah, again, looking at their losses, obviously the Browns. They're supposedly this analytically driven team, but can't draft. And if you look at the Ravens' losses, think about how high the Ravens have been picking in those years too, right? I mean, low, I guess I should say, and how high the Browns have been picking. And you look at the Ravens' losses this year, versus the Browns, it's so stark, right? There's just, there's one guy, Devin Bush, who to his credit turned his career around, right?
Yeah, he did.
But unfortunately, there's some big off the field stuff right now. Unfortunately, that's kind of clouding his career a little bit. So I'm sure they were fine with kind of letting him leave under those circumstances. So
100%.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that's pretty much where we left where we have the AFC North going into the draft. Any big picture thoughts after going through all that, Ryan?
I think we've definitely covered it. I mean, the like I said, the Browns doing Browns things, the Bengals doing Bengals things. Ravens had their challenges in this offseason. Pittsburgh, they were able to make some pretty decent signings, and so I think we can definitely look forward to the draft at least for the Ravens and the Steelers. There's a lot of potential in what could come out of it. And when it comes to the Bengals and the Browns and their ability to draft, it's that's a whole nother conversation. But at least at the end of the free agency, or I don't want to say at the end, but with the first month of free agency done, from the Steelers' perspective, I think that they did pretty well, and the rest of the AFC North had their things about them as well. We'll put it that way.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, that's it for this episode of the Steel Flock podcast. Is there a signing that you didn't like, a signing you wish happened, or a player that never left? Let us know in the comments. And if you want to continue getting free AFC North content, hit the like button and subscribe. It really helps the channel. He's Matt and I'm Ryan, and we'll see you in the next one.